And so the sixth component of the staff meeting is what we call the common questions and responses throughout the office. And here's some of the major factors that it does. First of all, we talk about that you should always have what is called a mission or purpose statement. Every staff member should know and memorize what the mission or purpose staff statement is. And it's very simple. All it is you're saying who we are, what do we do, and who do we do it for. That's it. Who we are, what do we do, and who do we do it for. That's the mission statement. And that is the purpose of why everybody comes into the office. And so every staff member should know and should memorize what the mission statement is. It's just a 30-second commercial, but that is the focus. It is the absolute pinnacle, the sole reason why you're there. Now, having said that, let me go into several of these topics relative to common questions and responses. And I want to go into the topic of sex, religion, and politics. And here's how that is handled in the office. And I had my staff members understand that if sex, religion, or politics were discussed in the office amongst staff members or patients, it was automatic grounds for termination. And here's why. It has to be unbelievably important, because no matter what you say about anything sexual related, anything religion related, or anything politics related, you are guaranteed to offend somebody. All of those topics are guaranteed to offend somebody, whether it's your patients or staff members. And nobody has the exact same opinions and life experiences with all three of those topics. And that's not the purpose of this office. The purpose of the office is to take care and help people. It is not to offend people in any format. And it's not, and therefore we pay no attention to the sexual orientation, religion, or politics. That has nothing to do with what we're treating patients for. We're treating patients for health-related problems. And you'll find that when you do this, when you eliminate those topics from your office, you will immediately, there will be staff members that will be thankful, because nobody has the same perspective of a sexual joke or a sexual innuendo. Everybody has different value systems to some degree. And so immediately when you eliminate that from your office, the staff talking or referencing anything about sex, politics, or religion, immediately you allow for a comfort zone, a non-threatening comfort zone. And that's what that work should be. Your work should be, it should pretty much be a safe place. It should not be someplace where people are threatened. So, and the reason I say it's automatic grounds for termination is because I wanted my staff to know what was important to me. Now, there's other ways of doing it. Sometimes you could say on a scale of 1 to 10, this is a 9 or this is a 10. So that gives a quantification number. But when you start saying things like it's automatic grounds for termination, then they understand that this is absolute. That there's about 5 to 7 things, and I'll point those out later, that are automatic grounds for termination. Well, that's 3 of them right there. In other words, we do not want to be creating problems at all. And the doctor is the lead. So if the doctor is saying anything religious-wise or political-wise or sexual-wise, the staff will take the lead, and they'll just follow right up. And so the doctor has to be very careful about also not, specifically the doctor, not saying anything relative to religion, politics, or sex. So in your office, the best thing that can happen in your office is nobody know anything about, sex, religion, or politics, because you are guaranteed to offend somebody. And this is not the place. A chiropractic office is not the place for any of that. And how to handle that. So if patients bring up any of these topics, politics, especially now, it's such a charged political environment. There is no way that I want patients to be engaging in conversations of politics with any of my staff members you are guaranteed to be offending people. So the staff members have to know that they're not to be engaging, and then they're not to be propagating these conversations with patients, and they're to be terminating them. And that's all we'd say. That's a topic that we'd rather not discuss in this office. That's as easy as how it's handled, is when the staff members are just trained. If any of that comes up, that's all they have to say is those are not topics that we discuss in this office. Now, the next one is healthcare. And this is another topic that doctors, and what happens is staff members will, they'll start giving advice to patients about healthcare inadvertently. And you can't do that. And the number one reason you can't do that is because it undermines the authority of the doctor. That's the number one reason. But also the staff is not licensed, but also if the staff member is an employee and it happened at the place of employment, then the doctor is partly liable. So if anything negative happens as a result of it, then the doctor's liable. So there's liability attached when your staff members start saying healthcare related issues. And I'll give you an example. This happened, I remember one time, a patient came out and said something about pain, and I remember a staff member said, well, I take ibuprofen for it. I'm like, there is no way that any unlicensed staff member should be giving any type of comments relative to health care while they're in my employment. That's literally malpractice. If something were to happen with that patient relative to that topic, and they were the employee, and it happened under the grounds of being the employee, you're liable for malpractice. So those are the main reasons why your staff member should never be talking about healthcare issues. Now, the only exception for that is when a staff member is actually taught or trained to teach somebody how to use an ice pack, or when, say, a staff member does a patient education report of findings. In other words, they're trained in your system of education. That's the only difference to that. But too many times when staff members will just start commenting on their own and their own experiences, whether it's using remedies or supplements or herbs or something, it could be anything. But it's your undermining authority, and you're liable. Something goes wrong. And by the way, that was another one of the topics that was grounds for termination. It was that important. I do not want any of my staff members creating liability issues for me or undermining my authority. And what should be said when a patient says anything to a staff member, and this, by the way, mostly happens at the front desk, but when a staff member says, when a patient says anything to a staff member, what the staff should say is, did you tell Dr. X that? Be sure to tell Dr. X. That's how, in other words, it's redirected. So the staff member doesn't comment on it. They said, did you tell Dr. X? Make sure you tell Dr. X, okay? So in other words, you put the authority back onto the doctor. But that was another one of those topics, that was grounds for termination, besides the obvious ones. But sex, religion, politics, healthcare, and the other one, I'll just tell you while we're on the topic, is discussing compensation. None of my staff members were allowed to talk about their compensation relative to any other staff members. That is a single best way to start creating problems in your office when somebody's making more money than somebody else. And so that's just not even allowed. That's automatic grounds for termination. And when you do these things, some of these topics like this, it may sound harsh, but it stops a tremendous amount of problems. Everything I just talked about creates big problems. And it stops a lot of big problems. Now, patient visits. I'm going to go into a couple of these topics when I talk about service specifically, but we always want to know what the patient visits are on. If the patients are on their visits, are they not, and if not, why? The thing here, it says ask versus tell. This is a very common problem in chiropractors' office. Most people have low confrontation. And so they'll ask instead of tell. And a common example of this is when the patient comes to the front and the front desk person says, "When does the doctor want to see you again?" See, it's easier to ask than to make an authoritative statement. Some people have confrontation issues to make an authoritative statement, to say, "Well, I see the doctor wants to see you Monday." See, that's an authoritative statement, as opposed to the staff member going, "When does the doctor want to see you again?" Well, that's very passive and weak, but that also tells you that there's no training. Either there's bad training or no training going on, because that type of communication should never be happening with that topic. We should be directing and controlling and leading and informing patients. And then the purpose of care. Again, I'll go into these in detail, but the purpose of the care. It's real important that we educate the staff members the basics of the clinical components of what you do. In other words, what do we get out of the consultation? What are some major components that we get out of the consultation, and what does it tell us to help us find the diagnosis? What are the components of the exam? Each of the different exams. In other words, as an example, my staff was taught all the components of the exam and the meaning of the different tests and the exams, or the potential meanings, and how that relates to me understanding what the patient's problem is or how they're progressing. Purpose of the care. Same with the 3 phases of healing. My staff could tell you, my staff could probably tell over 80% of the chiropractors, what the test, what the meaning of the consultation meant, what the test meant, and how it relates to the 3 phases of healing. And that's what it should be, because it creates a lot of confidence in what's going on. The other one is the doctor's personal life. A lot of times patients will ask about the doctor's personal life. Well, that's not to be discussed. Now, that's not one of the, that's not grounds for termination, but it's not to be discussed, because that'll happen also. Now, the doctor the staff should know the basics of the doctor's schooling. So all your staff members should know your undergraduate, your certifications, your graduate, and your certifications. Now, all your staff should know that. That's going to occur every now and then. Same with costs. All the staff members should know the cost. Remember, one of the things that I always say is, with the systems in play, no staff member should ever have to stop what they're doing to ask any other person, what that person is paying, if it's paid up or not, and what their treatment schedule is, and when they're coming back next. That should never happen. If that's happening, that's a bad system and bad training, because now everybody's got to stop. Not only does one person has to stop doing what they're doing, which stops everything, now they got to go stop somebody else. And again, this is no big deal if you're seeing 40 visits a week and it's 11 o'clock in the afternoon. But you will never be busy or have good service or high efficiency or build a business with that kind of service at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday. And that's how you always want to measure everything you do. The busiest time of the week, which is typically Wednesday, the busiest time of the day from 4 to 6. That is, how is everything moving at your busiest time? That's when you make your evaluations on systems, not the weakest time, because that's when everything's stressed. So that has to do with cost. Make sure we go over the basics of x-rays with our staff, what we look at x-rays and why. We'll go over the therapies. What are the therapies? What do they do? How do they work? And why do we use them? And like I said, with the exams, same with the exams. All my staff knew the basics of all the standard exam I did, from ranges of motion. My staff could tell you all 3 ranges of motion. They could tell you the basic tests, muscle tests. They could tell you the basic nerve tests. They could tell you the basic orthopedic tests. Okay, so this all helps. And then same with the referrals. We always want to see who is referring. Remember, with referrals, you always want to know your 80%, your 17%, and your 3%. Remember, 20% of your business will give you 80% of your business. So you always want to be paying attention and have a separate list. When it comes to your patients and referrals, you should have 3 lists. One is your 80% list. Those are the people that just come and go. They haven't referred anybody. They just come and go. The 20% people are the 17% of people that come and go, and they've referred at least one person. And so those are more valuable. And then the 3%ers are the people who have come and go, and they've referred 2 or more people. That becomes unbelievably important to know who those people are when we turn around and do our marketing events, because we're going to make sure that we put unbelievably high focus on the 3% and then and definitely the 20%. But we cover that more in marketing. And then you're going to just follow up with your ancillary items, your pillows, your back supports, vitamins, or orthotics. Make sure that your staff understands what they're for, how to promote them, what are the costs. They should just know. In other words, they shouldn't have to stop. If a patient wants to buy a neck support, the front desk person should not have to go, well, I don't know how that works, and stop everything and then go back and then stop the doctor and go, Doctor so-and-so wants to buy a pillow. How do we, what's that cost? Or what do we, that's the kind of stuff that never should happen. And that's from bad training and bad systems when that happens. I'll be going into some other techniques on how to stop that from happening. But these are the common questions. So you're going to have a section in your staff meeting where you want to cover common questions and responses. And one of the big things you'll hear, you'll see where it says patient visits, F right there. We're going to go into great detail. But every station should, when I say station, I'm talking about where every employee is, whether it's the front desk, the insurance, the therapy person. Every station should know exactly what to say to the patient there's about nine types of visits. 9 types of visits, from a day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, regular visit, pre-re-exam, re-exam, and post-re-exam report. So there's 9 unique visits to a chiropractic office. And every staff member should know exactly what should be said on that particular visit, because there's some visits that some things need to be said, and there's some things that don't need to be said. What I'm going to say on a day 2 patient is very different than what I'm going to say on a day 10 patient, a regular visit patient. And so it is unbelievably important that all the staff members understand the clear distinctions of what they're supposed to say with each of those 9 unique types of visits. When the patient comes in other words, when the patient comes to their station and when the patient leaves their station, they should know exactly what to say, and that's what we cover. Now, in addition to that, they have to know the insurance categories, the 5 different types of insurance categories, the basics of cash, major medical, personal injury, workers' compensation, Medicare. So, and this is what creates high efficiency. But it is real important that all the staff members should know. It should be choreographed, a total choreographed system from when the person calls in, exactly what happens, from the first time they walk in that door, the exact steps that happen with that front desk person, to the time they go back to the doctor, to the time it goes to the therapist. What should that therapist be doing? And then when the therapist is done, what should they be saying and doing when that person leaves? And then at the front desk, what should that person be saying or doing when that person is leaving at the end of the first day? These are checklists, and they're systems. And when you don't do that, that's when you just get chaos. That's when you got people stopping and asking and things not going well, and you won't have much of an efficient patient flow, and it actually turns out to be bad service. So it's unbelievably important that at each station, and this was part of the staff meetings, I would do the training. I'd go, okay, and it would sound like this. I would test every now and then. I'd go, okay, day 3, therapist. What do you do when the patient leaves? What are the steps? What should you do? What's the checklist? What are the steps you should do when you're done with therapy? See, that's a system. That's that person, end of that visit, on day 3. Well, it's going to be different than day one. And so this becomes unbelievably important for high efficiency.